So, what actually happens when you lie to the highest court in the land? It sounds like a simple question, right? But the answer? Well, it gets to the very heart of how justice works. Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating case that forced the Supreme Court of India to answer that question head-on.
Yeah, think about it. It's a question that really cuts to the core of the whole justice system. Back in 1996, the Supreme Court had to deal with this directly in a case that, you won't believe this, started as a simple little dispute but ended up setting a huge legal precedent.
All right, so let's set the scene. Our story doesn't begin in some grand, dramatic courtroom. Nope. It starts with something you hear about all the time, a dispute over a rental property. But, as you're about to see, even the simplest case can get incredibly complicated when one person decides to tell a very, very big lie.
This whole saga, which would go on to define a key part of Indian law, all kicked off with a routine eviction case, filed way back in 1985. Just imagine that. After years, and I mean years, of bouncing around the lower courts, this landlord-tenant fight finally lands on the Supreme Court's doorstep.
So the court basically dismisses the tenant's appeal, but they decide to be pretty reasonable about it. They give him a full 6 months to get his affairs in order, find a new place, and move out. And that should have been the end of it, right? The end of a legal battle that had already dragged on for a decade? But, as it turned out, it was really just the beginning.
And this is where it all goes off the rails. The deadline comes and goes, and suddenly, the Supreme Court is looking at two completely opposite stories. The tenant, Mr. Arora, swears up and down, "I've moved out. I handed over the keys. It's done." But the landlord, Ms. Markandey, says that's a flat-out lie. So the court is stuck. Who's telling the truth?
So, how does the highest court in the country figure something like this out? Well, it kinda has to put on its detective hat. And in this case, that meant unraveling a pretty tangled web of deception.
Okay, so let's just walk through this timeline. The original deadline was March 31st. Months go by, nothing. Then, in October, Arora claims he's handed over the property. And he doesn't just say it once, he says it in person to the Supreme Court, and then he files not one, but 2 sworn legal statements repeating the same story. But the truth? He only actually handed over the keys the following March, nearly a full year late and only after the court issued a warrant for his arrest.
So you might be asking, how did they finally catch him in the lie? Well, here's the smoking gun. The court had sent a neutral observer, a local commissioner, kind of like a referee, to watch the handover. And that commissioner's official report blew the whole thing wide open. It described how Arora put on this whole show of handing over the keys to the garage, but not the room. And then, just a few hours later, he went back and locked the garage up again. Possession was never actually transferred. Unbelievable.
And it gets worse. As the court dug in, they realized this wasn't a one-time thing. See, an affidavit is a legal statement where you swear to tell the truth. Back in 1989, Arora had sworn that he only occupied one room and a garage. But by 1995, his story had, well, it had grown. Now he was claiming a much bigger space with 3 rooms, a kitchen, the whole shebang. It just showed the court that he was willing to change his story under oath whenever it helped his case. Okay, so it's pretty obvious the guy lied, right? Case closed? Well, not so fast. His lawyer came up with a really clever defense, which raised a tricky legal question. Was what he did technically contempt of court? All right, let's get into the legal weeds for a sec, because this is the heart of the matter. Arora's defense was super technical. The court's original order said he needed to file a formal promise to leave, called an undertaking. He never filed it. So his lawyer argues, hey, how can you hold him in contempt for breaking a promise he never officially made? But the landlord's side shot back, hold on, you're missing the entire point. This isn't about some missing piece of paper. You lied, repeatedly, to the Supreme Court.
And there it is. That's the big question the Supreme Court had to figure out. Was this just a clever lawyer using a procedural loophole, or was this something way more serious? A direct attack on the integrity of the whole judicial process?
Well, the court did not waste any time with this one. It saw right through the technical argument and came back with a powerful, definitive answer. First, the court lays it all out. They explain that normally, if you just break a promise to the court, that's called civil contempt. It's serious, but it's about disobedience. But this, the court said, this was different. This wasn't about him not doing something he promised. This was about him actively doing something wrong. He lied, deliberately.
And that, my friends, falls into a much more serious category, criminal contempt. And it's a whole different ballgame. This isn't just about disobeying an order. It's about trying to rig the entire game. The court found that by filing false evidence, Arora was directly trying to mislead them and obstruct the entire administration of justice.
And listen to this quote from the actual judgment. It really says it all. Basically, they're saying if people can get away with lying to the court, the majesty of law, the authority and trust the whole system runs on completely falls apart. It makes a total mockery of justice. So, the bottom line? Guilty. That whole clever argument about the missing paperwork? Thrown right out. The court was crystal clear. The lie itself was the crime.
Now, you might be thinking, a 2,000 rupee fine? That's it? But hold on. The court had a very specific reason for this. He had already been arrested and had finally moved out. The fine wasn't just about punishing him. In the court's own words, it was to deter others. It was a message sent loud and clear to anyone else who might think about trying the same thing.
And wow, did that message stick? It's just amazing, isn't it? A case that started over one tiny room in a garage ended up leaving this powerful and lasting legal legacy.
So what's the big takeaway? This ruling became a landmark precedent. It basically slammed the door on that little loophole Arora's lawyer tried to use. It established clearly and forcefully that if you lie under oath in an affidavit, that is criminal contempt. Period. It doesn't matter about any other paperwork, it's not about procedure, it's about the truth.
And you know what? This isn't just some dusty old case that lawyers read about. The case of Rita Markandey versus Surjit Singh Arora is still cited all the time in Indian courts. It's become the go-to authority for holding people accountable when they file false evidence. It really stands as a guardian of the whole judicial process. Which brings us right back to where we started. If truth is the foundation of justice, what's the real cost of a single lie? Well, this case gives us a pretty clear answer. It's not just a fine. A single lie told to a court is an attack on the foundation of justice itself. And that's a line the system, as this case proves, simply will not tolerate.